Welcome to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. On this show, we feature different programs, individuals, and initiatives focused on being more inclusive of individual needs. We invite you to learn right alongside us. If you want some additional resources or access to our courses, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But for right now, let's get right to the episode. Coming up next on the Assembling Inclusion podcast.
I think we also hear from kids who are leaving the program that they just are leaving with a greater awareness about disability and kind of recognizing that, okay, different people experience the world in different ways, and we should be cognizant of that. And really, we have an ability with design and with technology to make that experience more accessible.
Today on the show, we're talking with Stacey Forsyth. As you'll hear in this episode, Stacey is one of the managers at Build a Better Book. This initiative works with libraries and makerspaces to help students design inclusive media like picture books, games, and graphics. We had a really great conversation about designing with an end user in mind and how the program can help build empathy and understanding for the makers. And we also talked about the different ways that Build a Better Book has benefited the individual makers, individuals with disabilities, and communities in general. So let's dive right in and learn more about Build a Better Book. Hello and welcome to the Assembly Inclusion podcast. Today we're talking with Stacey Forsyth. She is the director of CU Science Discovery, and she's one of the managers of the Build a Better Book project, which is based out of the University of Colorado Boulder. So Stacey, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So I came across the Build a Better Book program through the ISTE forum like a few months back actually. And so this program was one of the first ones I actually wrote down that I wanted to make sure I interviewed for the podcast. It just sounded like it really fit with the message of inclusion. So to start us off, can you explain for our listeners what the Build a Better Book project is?
Build a Better Book began as a makerspace initiative, working with children and youth in different types of makerspaces, schools and libraries, and also community makerspaces. And it really has this focus on, I would say, adding meaning to the making by really emphasizing for youth that they have that possibility of using technology and design skills to create things that might be useful for others. And so the project is focused on youth designing types of books and games and more accessible toys, primarily for children who are blind or visually impaired, or also have other physical or cognitive disabilities. And so that's been the focus, and really has been fun to see how the project has grown and evolved over the past few years, in part because of connections with educators that we've met through ISTE and other types of organizations.
I love the fact that you said it's giving meaning to the making. I think that's really nice. It makes it not only more authentic for the people making, but also kind of creates more of an inclusive feel.
One of the ways this came about was talking with librarians and educators who were trying to bring some of these maker technologies to their spaces. And sometimes we would hear from them their excitement for bringing a new technology to their learning environment, but not really having a good idea about how to use it or how to make that a really meaningful experience for their students. So when 3D printing was getting more common and people were getting access to 3D printers, they were really excited about 3D printers. But we heard from a lot of educators, my students really want to use this, but we're not really sure how to make that a really meaningful experience for them. And so Build a Better Book was in part a response to that, was really trying to provide this context and, I guess, overarching design task for the students who were in those spaces.
So you mentioned the fact that it's in both libraries and in schools, correct?
Yep, a whole variety of different types of organizations, actually.
Does the program look different depending on whether it's in a school or a public library? I'm assuming it has to, kind of, right? Because the school, you have a little bit more consistency with the scheduling and what you can do versus like a library or a different organization.
Exactly. I think one of the things that's been fun about this project is that it was designed to be really flexible and adaptable. And it's been really interesting to see where different educators have taken it. So some educators have worked with the project in a formal space, integrating it into an English class or a STEM class or a computer science class, for example. But we have a lot of educators or librarians who have worked with this in an informal space. So during out of school time, when students are coming into a library or into a makerspace or to a summer camp, for example. And it's been, I think, because it's really flexible, you don't necessarily need any particular type of technology. You don't need to have a particular type of space. It's really more about this more general idea of designing for others and thinking about a particular end user as you design and create something.
I really love the point about the flexibility, because I think even in a classroom that might be a little bit more structured with scheduling and time, it's nice that you don't have to have certain materials to be able to participate and you can still get something out of the program. So you had mentioned designing for a specific user in mind. And I think I read somewhere that the program is kind of based around the idea of asset-based learning, right? Or an asset-based approach, and also universal design for learning. Can you speak to how these two principles kind of work within the program to help students through the designing process?
The universal design for learning framework is really a helpful way for us to approach this task, because really the idea is about, by providing different modes and different ways for users to interact with material, it makes it more useful for everyone. And I think that's what we've really focused on with Build a Better Book, is that people experience the world in all different ways, depending on the abilities that they may have. And so presenting material, not just in a visual way, but maybe in a visual way and in a tactile way and in a way with audio elements or some type of interactivity, makes that product a lot more user-friendly for everybody. And so we take that approach and really encourage the youth that are participating in the program to think about the end user of their product and how they might be interacting with their product, so that they can really try to think about how to design that product to be more accessible. And I think taking this asset-based approach, we really want the youth that are working in the program to think about not just how people might be limited by some type of disability, but also what are their amazing abilities that they have and how can we build on those and leverage those strengths. And I think sometimes students come into the program and maybe thinking that they really need to help this person who's blind because they might not have access to something. And they end up really learning more about blindness and about disability more generally, and realizing that people that they thought may have kind of struggled to get by in the world really have these amazing abilities and often have developed these ways of thriving in this world. So really trying to emphasize that to the students that are participating, I think, is important.
I would have loved to have brought this to my students when I was still in the classroom. I taught in a resource room. And I think even just the empathy part of it, being able to understand someone else, I think that has to be huge. And I'm sure that's really beneficial for the students who are involved in the program.
Yeah, I think one thing that we hear often from both the youth and the educators that are participating in the project is that they recognize that if they haven't interacted with somebody who's blind before, it might just be something that they don't think about. And so they often take for granted the things that they're interacting with on a daily basis and not necessarily thinking about what that experience would be like if you were not a sighted person. And so I think for a lot of participants, we hear that one of the biggest things they get out of participating in the project is just increased awareness about how there's such a variety of people and with a whole variety of abilities.
Can you give me an example of specific things that students have built? I'm sure there's a lot. I mean, I was on the website, and I'll link to the website in the show notes so that everyone can kind of take a look at what's on there as well. But can you give an example of things you've seen that you really like that students have created that could really help someone?
The project began with a focus on tactile picture books. So that was kind of a focus early on, where students would use 3D printing or sometimes just cardboard and craft materials with different textures to create different tactile picture books to make those stories more accessible. But then that has broadened quite a bit over the years. So one thing we heard early on from some youth who are blind that we were working with was that they wanted more games. They just didn't have access to board games that we might take for granted, but they wanted to play games with their family. And so that prompted kind of a whole series of workshops with youth designing board games, creating original games, but also making existing games more accessible, either by adding different tactile features or audio cues that would enable people to play the game. So that's been really fun to see what has come out of those workshops.
I love the fact that they're designing their own possibly, which is great within itself too, but then also adapting games that exist, because that's something you don't even think about. Like I'm thinking about things, checker games, right? If you don't have certain tactile elements on there, you wouldn't be able to tell which one is which because they're all the same size and shape. I love that it shifted a little bit. Like this was the original plan and then we realized something else, and this is how we could also help people.
Exactly. We learn so much from the community partners that we work with because we obviously want to make sure that what the youth are designing is going to be useful. And so we really seek their input about the kinds of things they would want. And what we've heard is there's just a whole huge variety of things that people would love to have made more accessible. And I think in terms of games, we've worked on things like checkers and chess, Connect Four. Some things are actually fairly simple to create a more accessible version of. They're just not available now, or products that are available might be a lot more expensive. And so they might be something that a school might be able to invest in, but a family might not have in their house. And so working to just create designs that others might be able to replicate in a makerspace in their own community has been a big focus of the project in terms of trying to help make some more accessible versions of some of these things that others can also enjoy.
You had mentioned getting these ideas, these designs out into the community. I know there's a showcase at the end, right, where students present kind of what they built, but is there a way that students can then share their design with someone else who's a 3D printer so they can print it for other people at home, or trying to make it more accessible on a larger scale?
Yes, that's something we've really been trying to encourage, particularly as the project has grown and we've had new educator partners getting involved with the project in different parts of the country, is trying to provide a space for them to share their designs with others so that students aren't always starting from scratch, that they might also take a design that they're interested in or excited about and remix it or improve it so that it's even better. And so we have a space on our website where we have a design gallery showcasing some different student products. And then we also encourage sites that if students essentially refine their prototype to where it's a fairly user-ready product, that they share that on a maker site like Instructables, where they can then download all the different files they might need, either an Illustrator file that would allow them to laser cut something, or a 3D printing model that they could then take to their local library or community makerspace and have 3D printed. So that's definitely a big interest, is sharing some of these designs. One new phase of the project that we're really excited about is that in this coming year, we're going to be launching a new teen internship program in a few different parts of the country with some of our partners. And so this is a new project funded by the National Science Foundation. And we're excited to be able to involve teens over a longer term experience so that they actually have the time that they need to iterate on their design and really get some feedback from their end users and use that to improve their product so that they're able to get to a more refined prototype by the end of their internship. So we'll be kicking that off this summer and then later next year with our additional sites around the country. And I'm really excited to see what those youth produce, because I think they'll finally have a little bit more time where they can hopefully get those products to a more finished stage.
I didn't know there was going to be an internship program. That's really great. I love the fact that they'll be able to go through the entire design process. Then they can make edits and revise, and then maybe eventually push that out and share it on a website, which would be really amazing to do. You had mentioned you have different community partners, and I think I had read something about that. I can't remember the article. I think it was from the National Science Teaching Association about there was I think you were co-authored it with some other members of the Build a Better Book project. And there was an example about elementary students in Alabama, I think, who were partnering with like a local zoo to design tactile learning materials. Can you give me some other examples of how this program has kind of branched into other communities and organizations?
We really encourage our different site partners to reach out to the community, to find partners who might be interested in working with them to co-design and create these materials. So yeah, you mentioned the Birmingham Zoo. They were interested in creating a tactile map of the zoo for visitors that come to their site. And so that was a project that some of our Alabama partners worked on. We've also had many sites work with the special education departments within their school districts. Sometimes those students are working on products that are then housed at the school library, for example, and then checked out to teachers in the district so that when teachers are working on teaching a particular topic, they can essentially check out this multimodal kit to teach about space or to teach about history. And we also have several groups that work with schools for the blind in their area, sometimes with local families. So it's really a whole range of different types of partners. But what's really critical, we find, about having that community mentor piece is that they play such an important role in both kind of sharing what the need is with the students who are going to be designing the product, really giving them an idea about what they're looking for and what's out there already, but where it falls short, and some of the issues that they really want addressed. And then ideally, hopefully, they're also able to give some feedback along the way so they can test a product out and students have a chance to improve what's not working well or what's confusing or where it's falling short for what the community partner wants.
And they know who their end user is, then they can go right to that organization or the individual if they're working in a specific school and partnering up with the departments in their school building. I like the fact that they're really making those connections on top of the making, obviously, but then really making sure they know who their end user is and how to fix the product. So overall, this is kind of a broad question. So far, what do you think has been the most important outcome for this project? You touched on it a little bit, some things that have come out of it, but what do you think has been the most beneficial so far?
I think what's been really exciting for us to see is the impact that designing for others has on the participants that are involved in the project. I think this idea of designing a product for others really provides this authentic design challenge. And it's proven to be really motivating for the kids that are participating. We hear from students who, if they're opting into a program like this, they're not always necessarily the kids that have traditionally opted into STEM programs, but they are really drawn to the overall goal of Build a Better Book. And they're really interested in this aspect of contributing something for others. So I think it's helped us to attract a broader group of youth to the program, but then I think it also has this really important motivation factor for helping them to persist through what are often these challenges that they encounter throughout this process. It might be really frustrating that their computer code isn't working or something's off with the electronics and it's not lighting up the way that they think it should. And those challenges can be really frustrating sometimes, but I think when they know that they're making something for someone else, there's this pressure to really do the best job they can. And so it's been really exciting to see how that has, I think, helped them, really motivated them to do their best in the program, which is great to see. I think we also hear from kids who are leaving the program that they just are leaving with a greater awareness about disability and kind of recognizing that, okay, different people experience the world in different ways, and we should be cognizant of that. And really, we have an ability with design and with technology to make that experience more accessible. And so I think they are leaving with just a greater awareness of that, which I think is probably the most important thing that we can do with this program.
I think about my students and I can see them getting frustrated with something like that, designing things and having it not work. But I like the fact that they have an end user, they have somebody they're trying to do something for, and they're going to pursue and persist through and go through that design process really in full to try to make sure it's the best it could be. I could see how that could be motivating. The fact that you're becoming more aware of what people need and how people live their lives and getting a better sense of who they are. And I think that's amazing too. So if a school or an organization or library wanted to get involved with Build a Better Book, how would they go about doing that?
I would encourage them to visit our website, which is buildabetterbook.org. We have some resources on there for educators who are looking to connect with the program or possibly bring aspects of the program to their own site. And although we're not actively running professional development workshops right now, we still are partnering with new organizations, and we're always available to provide some support, whether that's through a phone call or pointing them the direction of some of the resources we have online or of other partners in the network who might be able to help out. So yeah, I would just encourage them to reach out if they're interested in learning more.
Fantastic. And I will link to the website in the show notes. That way people can go right there if they're interested in partnering up with the program, which sounds amazing. And I really wish that I was still in the classroom to be able to partner up my class, because I could just see how this would have been so beneficial for them. They love to be hands-on, like every year consistently. They always loved the idea of making.
I think it's just really engaging for youth to be creating new things, especially if they realize that something quite like this doesn't quite exist yet. And so I think for them to both be involved in making something new, but then also knowing it's going to someone else is just really empowering.
It's really all about that authentic learning experience. So I want to thank you, Stacey, for being here with me today.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me to join you on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Assembling Inclusion podcast. I hope the information in this episode taught you something new, gave you a new idea, or showcased a new perspective. If you liked the episode, feel free to leave us a review or comment. If you have a recommendation for an individual or an organization who would make a great guest, you can message us on Twitter or Instagram, or send us an email at assemblinginclusion@gmail.com. See you next time.